Hello Internet, and welcome to another, well, this isn't a Metroidvania map announcement video, but it is to do with Metroidvania maps. If you are one of the many people who has used one of my maps this year, this will be a slightly more well, maybe interesting is not the right word, but it's possibly a more interesting video for you than my kind of general game of my 2022 year awards. This one is about Metroidvania maps, and if you're a bit more interested in what I do, how I do it, and why I do it, then this will be a video to watch. This is all about the maps that I've created this year and which I had the most fun in creating. And I'm just going to go through all of the different maps that I've created this year using my Google Drive because it's easier. So it's not the most exciting video to watch probably, but we'll see. This is very unscripted. I'm going to go through each of the maps. I'm going to talk about some of the maps. I'm going to talk about the games in general, actually, and maybe come to some different conclusions than I did a couple of days ago when I was actually trying to figure out, well, what was my favourite Metroidvania game of 2022. So for clarity's sake, and I've had another couple of days to think about this, when I think about Metroidvania games, I've spoken before about the three pillars that I believe makes a good Metroidvania title. There's combat, there's exploration, and then there are the traversal abilities that can often tie into combat, exploration, or both. So having interesting combat with interesting mechanics, I think, is important. Having interesting areas to explore that are visually interesting, visually different, and so on and so forth is essential. And being able to get around those areas in interesting ways, and some of those abilities also tying into combat, is, I don't want to say essential, but for me, the best Metroidvania games are the games that tie in the things for traversal, the abilities for traversal into combat as well. For me. So, let's go through some of the games. Have I done these? I think, yeah. These aren't organised in alphabetical order. I don't know why, but I made some notes for my Game of the Year video, and for some reason I think I started organising them but didn't do so. So let's start off with Aeterna Noctis. Let's take a look at the maps for Aeterna Noctis. Aeterna Noctis is one of those games that has a really beautiful map. The artwork for the map, this actually isn't probably the best zone to show it off. This will be, though. It's got some really pretty artwork. Making the maps for Aeterna Noctis was a slow process, especially in this area with its many different locations, and also the cosmos level as well. I mean, this is beautiful artwork. It's really kind of visually stunning. Absolute pain in the backside to get round this zone. In terms of the map as a whole and what it looks like, it was a really fun map to put together. If we just take a look at this is the entertainingly titled Big Map Wide document. I have no idea why it's called that, but this is the full size map. This is actually an old version of it because this was getting so unwieldy to work with at this size. Yeah, this is the actual size of the document. That I split it up and I did the rest of the work on it in the kind of little bits and pieces. It is a massive game with loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of information and different bits and pieces on it. It was a really fun map to create. I wasn't a big fan of the game per se. It's a beautiful game. It's well animated. The combat is full of options getting around the world, has got some really interesting mechanics to it. I liked them all in premise. I just found that the precision necessary to really explore this world to its fullest was a bit much. And keeping in mind, I've done Hollow Knight, I've done The Path of Pain. I like challenging games, but I think I've completed Super Meat Boy. I like challenging platformers, but if you're gonna have a challenging platformer, the controls need to be absolutely 134% spot on in terms of precision. And for me, Aeterna Noctis didn't have that. I played the game on the easy mode, which made it a little bit less of an issue than it was. And I was still getting a little bit frustrated with some of the problems. So, Aeterna Noctis, beautiful game, decent combat with lots of options, great biomes to explore, good storyline to accompany them. You go down to a place like the Abyss, and there's loads and loads of little lore bits and pieces. I really enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the variety of zones. The abilities to traverse these zones were great. In terms of, is it a good Metroidvania? According to my 3 pillars, absolutely. It is an excellent game, as long as you don't mind some fiddly challenge and platforming. As I said in my game of the my arbitrary awards video, there's a subset of the kind of gaming community who really like challenging platformers and Metroidvanias. There's a handful of very vocal people saying that Aeterna Noctis is better than Hollow Knight. And Hollow Knight is kind of the standard that a lot of people, a lot of games have to, quote unquote, live up to. I don't think it is. I don't think it's a Hollow Knight beta. I think Hollow Knight is a more fair, I think, game, but that doesn't mean that Aeterna Noctis is a bad game by any metric. I just think it was unnecessarily frustrating. Haiku the Robot. Got some notes for the Haiku the Robot maps. This map is ever so slightly out of date, or it's just been updated because the game has literally like a handful of days ago been updated with a new mode. I might play the mode, the corrupt mode, where we are the virus. Haiku the Robot is a solid game for 1 out of the 3 pillars, I'm going to say. It's a decent game for 2 out of the 3 pillars, but it's not brilliant for all 3 of the 3 pillars. In terms of the areas to explore, I really liked Haiku the Robot. All of these different areas, color-coded as they are, were really nicely put together, helped by the art style of the game. So the bunker, the factory, the expanse, the water ducts, they're all visually distinctive. They've all got a wonderful pixel art style, especially the kind of Forgotten Ruins with its greenery. There's a lot to find. There's a lot to explore. I had a really good time putting this map together in terms of what is where, what can be found, finding out all of the, well, I say all of them, many of the little secret caches, getting the NPCs labelled on, finding the different chip sockets. It was a really good game to explore. The traversal abilities that allowed that exploration were also a mix of good and standard. You got your double jump, you got your dash. You also got a teleport dash, which allows you to go through walls. You got a grappling line that allows you to zip all the way across the screen. That was good fun, actually. But Haiku the Robot, for me, falls quite flat in terms of its combat. It's a little bit basic. And I know some people might say, well, you know, if you pare it down, actually, Hollow Knight's combat is also a little bit basic. The problem is that Hollow Knight has a fairly significant challenge to it and somewhat Soulsy style mechanics, which Haiku doesn't have. If you think about the soul meter in Hollow Knight, where you can choose to spend your soul on healing, Haiku has a similar system in the sense of you can earn scrap as you go around the world, and you can bank that scrap actual banks if you want to. They're marked on here, actually, I believe, as kind of little bird perches. But you also use that scrap to heal, which is fine, because you get plenty of it. The issue is that you drop it when you die, which, you know, don't know whether I was a massive fan of that mechanic. But the fact that the healing itself was really, really slow, yeah, I just found the combat a little bit basic. And I've got to say, you know, looking at this map, I can't really remember much about it. You know, I can't remember a lot about this game. And I know it was more towards the start of the year that I played it, and I'm an old man with a bad memory at times. But I remember enjoying it when I played it. But it hasn't stuck with me in terms of, oh, this was a great Metroidvania game for all three pillars, just because I think the combat was just a little bit... I don't want to say dull. I want to say basic. I'm not trying to shit on any of the designers of these games. You know, this is not me saying, oh, I could do this better. I can't. You know, I don't have enough game dev experience for that. But I have played a lot of games with more interesting combat than Haiku the Robot this year, which was a shame, because in all respects, you know, this is clearly a labor of love. It's got it's very derivative of Hollow Knight, with a little kind of robot-y style spin on basically everything that it has borrowed. It's a good game. I'm not trying to say, you know, Haiku is a terrible game. It is not. It is a good game by any standards, let alone the standard that says, oh, you know, a single guy made this game. You know, it's impressive. And it was a fun map to put together. Lots of interesting bits and pieces on here. Just not really not really memorable, shall we say. On the subject of games that lack memorability, we have HunterX. See, not so much a sequel to 3000th Duel, but by the same design studio, and actually uses the same engine, same map assets, and so on and so forth. This had some basic exploration. All of the zones were okay to explore. Getting around the zones was okay. Combat was okay. HunterX is kind of the epitome of mediocre. You know, it was all right. It's not going to blow anybody's minds in terms of story, in terms of themes, in terms of map design, in terms of traversal, in terms of the equipment that you can get, the things that you can put up, the secrets that you can find. It is a, by the numbers, you could argue, Metroidvania title. It works. It's by people that clearly understand some of the basics and some of the fundamentals of the genre. You know, the combat's all right, the traversal abilities are all right, the areas to explore are, for the most part, nicely done. if I'm honest. I'd say that because it's a 2.5D game, is HunterX. It was all right, but it's not a game that I'm, rushing to advertise and go back to. I did the map. I thought, yeah, that's how those things fit together. Okay, I'm done. I've said in previous videos, but if you haven't watched those, let me reiterate. These maps I make because I like knowing how games and areas fit together. One of the reasons why I like the Souls games from Software and the various iterative imitations that other people put out is that I like the way those areas loop back around upon each other. When I first found the untended graves in Dark Souls 3, it's like, hold on, I'm back at the start of the game. How? And then it's like, but wait, I'm not back at the start of the game because this is a different version of it. And that wasn't the start of my relationship, if you like, with how these things work. But I found it very, very interesting. And in terms of how these areas link up, it's a very basic design if you compare it to some of the other games that I've played. As opposed to Souldiers. Souldiers as a game is so big that I don't think I've actually got an individual kind of full game map. Here we go. This is what the full map of Souldiers looks like. This is not the document that I ended up using. This just happens to be one that I've got knocking around. It's a big world, but I ended up actually turning it into individual areas just because it was easier to do it that way. Souldiers has got, in terms of the 3 pillars, a lot of things really right. Its areas are excellent. All of the exploration of the earlier areas, Tempest Plains West, where you start off the game, make your way down there. The spider lair is brilliant. This kind of half of the zone down here you can't get to the first time you come in. You can only do this top bit here and work your way around because you can't get through the water. The actual map itself, these icons and stuff, these are all marked for you in game. It has got arguably the most comprehensive in-game map system for this is where things are that I've seen in a very long time. You go through Tempest Plains, that's got some nice easy stuff in it. Go through the top half of the Forest of Fire or Fear or whatever. You make your way to Haffin City. I actually pulled out various assets from the game to do this. There's a lot of really good stuff in the first bit of Souldiers. And then it all fell apart in the release version when you got to the Great Pyramid. In fact, I've still got my note on the map here about what happens if you fall into the trap. This doesn't happen anymore because so many people got frustrated with the combat and the systems in this game that the developers had to put out a big patch, and it was a hatchet job patch which just nerfed the difficulty into the ground and actually didn't fix the problems that a lot of people were complaining about. So what we have is a game with amazing pixel art, great music, great areas to explore, although perhaps just a little bit frustrating and on the big side in places. Really good abilities to traverse these areas and to kill things in combats, with a combat system that on paper was great and in practice full of ever so slightly counterintuitive design decisions that were frustrating. For example, once you get to the floating module, there are a load of bird enemies that can paralyze you. And that's like, oh, well, you know, avoid the paralysis, etc, etc, etc. The problem is, if you don't avoid the paralysis, the debuff lasts for 30 seconds. And health potions were really difficult to come by, and enemies constantly flew out of range, and you can get a load of sub-weapons that you can use, and there's no way of just selecting the sub-weapons that you want to equip. You have to equip them all and then cycle through them, and it's really slow and it's really frustrating. Same with the consumables. And then if you upgrade the sub-weapons, they're more powerful. They also cost a load more to use as well, so you don't get to use them as often. There's just too many system choices that fail. The combat premise, the actual systems that they've got in place, the ideas for the systems that they've got in place are excellent. Just like the map is excellent, just like the boss design is excellent, but the actual meat and potatoes systems of the combat is not very good. There were things that just shouldn't have made it into the release. So as I said, they put out a big patch which just nerfed the difficulty, so the frustrations that people were feeling seem less obvious, but the actual problems in the combats and the systems are still there, which is a real shame. It was a fun map to create. It was a great map to explore. The exploration in Souldiers is brilliant. I cannot state that enough. The exploration is excellent. The map design is excellent. The pixel art is excellent. The zone design is excellent. The puzzles to do are excellent. But the whole package was let down by underlying system flaws that sapped out a lot of the enjoyment in the moment-to-moment combat, and there's a lot of combat in the game, which is a really sad thing to have to admit. I mean, look at these maps. These maps are awesome. Yeah, and I don't just say that because, you know, I've made them quite pretty. I've added on the lava and stuff on these as well. I really enjoyed mapping the game out. I didn't enjoy playing the game though, and that's a problem. So that was Souldiers. I really wanted this to be my Metroidvania of the year when I was mapping it out, because I thought it was so well done in terms of two of the three pillars. But unfortunately, the combat was such a frustrating mess. If you're playing it now, you know, towards the end of the year, if you're playing it now, which is essentially on the kind of easy mode version of it, a lot of the issues that I've got with the game are less noticeable. But they are still there. Unless they've been patched, I don't know. I've stopped following the game. The last update that I did was 16th of July, and it says, I won't be playing Souldiers again, though there are many better games out there. Which is a little bit savage of me, but it is what it is. So that was Souldiers. Because this is a video about maps, the Tarnishing of Juxtia. I still don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. Juxtia? Don't know. Tarnishing of Juxtia has a map. It's not the most complicated map in the world. It's got a nice visual style to it. It's all right. It's not a Metroidvania at all. If you are expecting a Metroidvania from the Tarnishing of Juxtia, and it was tagged as such on Steam for a while, it's not one. If you want a Metroidvania experience, do not bother picking up this game. If you want, well, let's go back to the three pillars: combat, zones to explore, abilities to explore them and fight with. No, I can't say there are no abilities. There's one. I can't even remember actually what it is off the top of my head. I assume I've got it marked on here somewhere, but I literally can't even remember what the one traversal ability is. I just vaguely recall that you get one. But yeah, it's not a Metroidvania, but it does have good Souls-like combat. At least decent Souls-like combat, considering it's, you know, a 2D pixel art game. It's all right. You know, the areas are interesting. It's got a very distinctive visual style. There are things to find, but it's not Metroidvania. It was an all right thing to go and map out. As far as I'm aware, I think I got pretty much everything on there. But yeah, Tarnishing of Juxtia was all right. 2D Souls-like. It wasn't terrible. Zapling Bygone, very much a Metroidvania. A proper Metroidvania, an indie Metroidvania. And I quite enjoyed Zap, to be honest. It's not the most expansive game in the world, but it does have some, you know, decent mechanics. It's got some interesting story beats. It had a few bugs when I played it, but those have been ironed out now. There's a lot of things to find. There's some really nice artwork in the game. In terms of the 3 pillars, combat is a bit basic, but it's functional. The areas to explore are nicely done and very varied. This place in particular, Grimtown, is quite atmospheric, as is the sewers, actually, as is the mines. There are a huge number of kind of charms, essentially, that you can slot into your skull, because you wear a skull, and there is a variety of different skulls that you can find that all have different kind of slots for different shaped charm/abilities. There are even charms that actually give you upgrades or extra abilities, as well as just basic abilities that you can find as soon as you kind of defeat a boss and collect its bits and pieces. This was a fun game to play, to be honest. You know, there was some really cool kind of wall climbing, ceiling climbing. The developer clearly had a vision for what they wanted their game to do, and they built the engine to allow them to do that. I enjoyed Zapling Bygone. Solo dev effort works really well in terms of its pillars. As I said, the combat is a little bit basic, but the map is well put together. It worked. Lots to explore, lots to find. Reasonably short, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Not every game needs to be a 40-hour Hollow Knight style epic. I recommend that you try Zapling Bygone. It's not exactly an expensive game, and whilst it looks very retro in terms of its pixel art style, some people might say it looks a bit crude, it plays very well. Islets, not a very challenging game to map out. All of the kind of the 5 different, well, 6 different squares technically, were all in the files with a lot of bits and pieces marked on anyway, which I found afterwards when I came to map it out. Islets was a good time. You know, its map is nice. Getting around the map was fun. There's lots of one-way doors, there's levers, there's things that need breaking, there's various bits and pieces to find. Combat was interesting. It had options. Again, I won't say it was massively deep, but it had things that you can do. I'd argue that it was a little bit floaty, just in general. In fact, the kind of game felt a little bit floaty, but actually I found as I went on that worked in the game's favour. It was clearly a design choice. You know, it wasn't that they'd accidentally made everything a bit floaty. It was actually quite forgiving in many cases because of the floatiness. The different areas were gated really well in terms of what you could get to, where you could get to them, how you could get there based on the abilities that you got. It was very well done Metroidvania in that regard. And the abilities that you got were drip fed to you in a nice cadence. You know, you've got your double jump, you've got your climb, you've got your ground slam, You've got charge attack. Charge attack came really late in the game, if I remember correctly. Cloud shot was a really cool ability. It allowed, because you have a sword and a bow and arrow in the game, and cloud shot allowed you to fire arrows across the screen, and for the little kind of cloud trail behind the arrow to actually turn into a collidable platform, which you could then stand on to get to higher places. And I thought that was really, really good. Yeah, that was a really fun and entertaining mechanic. And the same goes for shift shot, which allowed you to teleport through tiny gaps. The traversal options were great. Many of them were also useful in combat to a degree. And as I said, whilst the combat was a little bit floaty, the actual game, I think, benefited from it. And there's also a little bit of kind of bullet helly stuff on the world map as well that I really enjoyed. You know, Islets is a good time. It's not, again, a super long game. I think it took me maybe 10 hours total to 100%, but it was fun. The storyline was good. The characters were charming. The graphical style is great. Again, it's not a super expensive game. So if you like your Metroidvanias, I do recommend Islets as a game to try. I've just realised, actually, I think, that these games might be in the order that I mapped them out in. Almost the order that I mapped them out in. I had an inkling this year to return to some of the classic games of old that got me really hyped about the genre in general. Because I'm of an age, I had a Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, and when the older Castlevania titles came out on the GBA and the DS, I loved them, you know. Plus Metroid Fusion, of course, which remains one of my favourite games to this day. On a whim, I thought, I want to play some Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. It was always one of my favourite of the 2D Metroidvania handheld Castlevanias. So I went back, I found a copy of the game. I actually own a copy of the game, so I don't feel bad about emulating it or anything like that. And I played it through, and I thought, well, I started playing it through. I thought, you know what, I could map this out. It's like, but loads of people surely have mapped out Order of Ecclesia, and they have. And their maps are old. Because the game is old. And I thought, well, I need to do something about this then, don't I? Because it's 2022, and we need a Demajen-style map for Order of Ecclesia. Well, yeah, a full game map with all of the items linked in the places where you don't have to look up different codes to find bits and pieces with what things are. There are some details actually in terms of what is in these various treasure chests that actually isn't included on this map. I meant to go back and add on how the chests work, and I clearly didn't because I got distracted by the next game actually on this list. Order of Ecclesia is a fabulous game. It has great areas to explore. They're linked via a world map, realistically. It's proper 2D Castlevania, essentially. And therefore, if you like the combat in that, which I happen to do, you will enjoy this. In terms of how well does it match all three pillars of the classic Metroidvania, excellently. Combat has lots of options. There are lots of ways to get around the different areas, to get underwater, to get through small gaps, and so on and so forth. There are some really interesting bits and pieces that you can do in terms of phasing through walls. The glyph system was excellent. The story was well told. Order of Ecclesia is a great game for a reason. And I really enjoyed mapping this stuff out. You know, a lot of work was already done for me in terms of where are the things to find, so I could go and double check things versus other people's maps. But in terms of a 2022 graphical overhaul of, well, this is what Order of Ecclesia looks like rather, I really enjoyed putting this map together. And it wasn't a terribly exhausting thing to do, as opposed to the Portrait of Ruin map, which has got a lot more items on because of its dual character switching system. This was I don't want to say a slog, but it took a while to get through just because of how many items that I needed to find in the files, cut out, and so on and so forth. A big map with a lot of information on. A much more challenging game to play than I remember, realistically. Each of the areas for the 3 pillars of exploration here, each of the areas are visually distinct thanks to the fact that we're going into a painting, essentially. So, you know, they're all very interesting. I like the fact that a lot of the areas have kind of got 2 different versions of them. That was, you know, really cool. And they are clearly different versions of the same zone. They're not just a palette swap. You know, they're fully different zones based on roughly the same kind of order of locations. I really enjoyed Portrait of Ruin. It's a better game than I think people give it credit for. And it was a really fun map to map out. And you get abilities and stuff to get to various places all the way through the game, which I really like. Again, in terms of the 3 pillars, the combat is great, the exploration is great, and the abilities that work with combat and exploration are really, really, really good. Moonscars. I really liked Moonscars. It was challenging. Its combat had got a good chunk of depth to it. The various areas, visually distinctive, interesting to explore, real sense of atmosphere in them. Lots of things to find, especially kind of little bits and pieces hidden away. Lots of very Souls-style quests to do on the way. You have to have 2 run-throughs of the game because there's 2 quests that are mutually exclusive, which isn't a huge... I'm not a huge fan, shall we say, of that kind of design, but I really enjoyed Moonscars, and I really enjoyed putting the map together. There's 2 versions of the map. Got a load of versions of them in here, apparently. Which one do I want? That one, I think. It's a big map, and originally it looked like this, and people didn't like it, apparently, which is a shame, because I actually think that this original map looks better, artistically better, but people said they found it confusing. So the devs actually went and took out a lot of the background graphics and squared off all of the walls. I feel it loses a bit of its character. It's certainly more readable. It's certainly easier to find things on, but I do think it actually loses some of its character, sadly. But it was a great game to map out. It's got good areas to explore. It's got really solid Soulsy-ish combat. There's some challenge to it. There were a few systems that I wasn't a huge fan of. I found that under the kind of red moon, enemies became just a little bit too spongy, especially the bosses. There were plenty of things to find. I would say that in terms of the traversal abilities, there's not a lot to find there. Yeah, there aren't a huge number of Metroidvania abilities in this game. There's one that you can get through a small number of kind of flesh walls. There's a super dash that you can get to get across various chasms. But for the most part, getting through places involves a lot of breakable walls, involves killing various enemies in an area, or involves finding a lever or a key. All of which, of course, are marked on the map. There's breakable walls. There's loads of just consumable Soul-style things to find. It's a very solid Metroidvania experience. A little bit lacking in the traversal. And I think, actually, if it weren't for how flawed I find some of the other games that came out in 2022, I can't honestly stand up and say that Moonscars is an amazing Metroidvania. It's a very good Metroidvania, but it is more Souls-y than Metroidvania, I would argue. It's a little bit like Blasphemous in that regard. You know, Blasphemous became more Metroidvania-y as you went on, but a lot of its Metroidvania elements were kind of optional. Same goes for Moonscars. A very good Metroidvania game, a very good and fun game to map, but not for everybody in any way, shape or form. Lunar Nights. Lunar Nights. This was a game that I played probably 10 minutes of back when it came out, and it wasn't really my cup of tea, to be honest. I don't know anything about Touhou, however you pronounce it. I know it's got a big following. I know there's a load of different games in the series in a load of different genres. It's like a crowd. I don't understand it. And I don't want to. I know that people have asked me about it in the past. It's like, oh, well, you could look at these resources. Like, it's not really it's not my thing. The game itself is all right. It's short. There are plenty of things that you can find. You know, all the things in pink on here are different abilities that you can get. You know, you've got your wall climb, double jump. I can't actually remember what some of these do. It was an all right game. I think combat has got some interesting ideas to it, and I think because it's not a very big game and there's not really much to explore, it is more combat focused. It's got some time stoppy weird mechanics that, you know, I just mostly ignored, if I'm honest. And therefore, in terms of the three pillars, you know, it's got the abilities, it's got the different areas to explore, even if they're not massively visually interesting or different, but there is a good chunk to like there in terms of combat. I literally only played this because somebody asked me whether I'd make a map for it, and I did. You know, it had already been mapped out by other people, so I just built on their work to create a Demajen style map of it. I'm not claiming that this is a very innovative or interesting piece of mapping, but I did enjoy mapping it out, and I enjoyed what exploration there was in the game. Certainly not an amazing Metroidvania as far as I'm concerned, but an entertaining game to map out regardless. And here's another game that I had a lot of fun mapping out in terms of the three pillars: combat, areas to explore, and ways to explore and fight your way through them. The Night Witch was an interesting mashup of a Metroidvania and a shooter. I'm always wary about calling it a bullet hell shmup, because it's got hints of bullet hell, but really it's not. Sometimes I use the term bullet hell and shmup interchangeably, and I shouldn't, because they're not actually the same thing. This is a Metroidvania shmup. There are some light bullet hell mechanics in this, but it is far more forgiving than a bullet hell game, really. It's got a lot of areas to explore. It's got proper Metroidvania design in the sense that there are various places, many of which are marked on in various ways, that you can't get through unless you've got abilities later on in the game. There are secrets to find. There are cards to collect to enhance your powers. You know, anytime you see something in pink on one of my maps, it's normally, oh, you need a specific thing to get through here. And you can see that there are plenty of those on there. It's a really good looking game. It's got great exploration. It's got nice kind of collectathon style mechanics. That area in particular was fun to map out. I really enjoyed the different biomes and exploring the different biomes. The movement upgrades and abilities that you get were maybe not used as much in combat as potentially they could have been. They were very kind of movement focused, because the combat is based on a kind of spell card system. I feel like that could have done with some tweaking in terms of the UI, but it was all right, and there's a lot of things to do. There's some quests to do as well, which I appreciated. The game also had inbuilt cheat codes, which I thought was an interesting choice. So you could use all those to play through the game, and I did use some of those because I'm not good at shooters, and I was more interested in mapping the game out that I was enjoying it. But I still got 20-odd hours, I think, total out of the Night Witch. I can't remember how long it took me to put the map together. I used to make notes on these, but I've forgotten. I might have mentioned it in the video that was nearer the time. I've forgotten at this point. 100%ing it was an interesting challenge. That was good times. It was a good game. You know, the Night Witch is a really solid, good Metroidvania experience. But if you don't like shmups, you're not going to enjoy the game, frankly. You know, there's no platforming in this game in the traditional sense because you can fly. You know, it's got full 360 movement in the same way that Pronti had full 360 movement, though it's a little bit slower in this game. It's an interesting one, the Night Witch, and as I said, it was a fun game to explore. It's just it's very shmuppy, and that's not for everyone. Biogun isn't out yet. I enjoyed the demo of Biogun so much that I mapped out the demo. Yes, that's how much I enjoyed it. Biogun is shaping up to be a really fun Metroidvania experience. It's got a great premise that you are a microorganism injected into a dying dog, trying to save it from, you know, the disease or whatever it was. I can't actually remember the exact plot, but you have got all of these different body organs and areas to explore. It's a brilliant premise for a Metroidvania game where, you know, Metroidvanias thrive on the diversity of biomes that you can go and explore. The combat is tight, although the controls some people don't like. I was fine with them, but they're not going to be for everybody. The art style is excellent. The main programmer actually wasn't a programmer when he started this project. He was involved in a Kickstarter a few years ago, and the Kickstarter succeeded, and then the actual main programmer disappeared. There's more to the story than that. That's a very quick summary of it. But the lead artist felt so bad for the people that donated their money, because obviously there's no refunds on Kickstarter, that he started creating this game to make sure that, you know, the people that backed that previous Kickstarter could get something for their money. And that's what Biogun is going to be. You know, this is an old map now. They've changed the logo. They're getting towards release. I think it'll come out probably sometime in 2023. It's really good. It's got fun movement. It's got fun areas to explore. It does the kind of Hollow Knight thing in terms of each of the map bits is made up of different segments. Actually, that's what these different lines are for, to show the different rooms. For my benefit, just to remind me how things were put together. The boss was fun. The art is, you know, clear. You know, you've got these little feep up things that you can find, which are very much like the kind of caterpillars from Hollow Knight. Had to think about that then. You play as a pig. Yes, that has to be seen to be believed. There are little kind of temporary power-up things that you can find. Different things that you can use to, you know, get piece of heart style things. Different helmets that you can use to change your appearance. It's really good. I'm really looking forward to Biogun, and as well as being visually interesting, having a wide variety of abilities, even in the demo, just to get around these different areas. The combat is kind of proper shooter twin stick almost style, quite Metroidy, I suppose you could say. So in terms of the three pillars of a good Metroidvania, Biogun's really good. It's shaping up to be really good, and I enjoyed playing through the demo as part of Next Fest. You know, if you've watched any of my Next Fest videos, you know that I try and keep them to about 30-ish minutes. I played 3 hours of Biogun because there's a lot to it. I've played through the demo a couple of times. 3 times, I think, for mapping purposes. I'm really looking forward to mapping this game out when it comes out. I expect this work to be completely wasted. I assume things will change before the actual release, but really looking forward to what they're going to do with Biogun. Really enjoyed it. Colourful, charming, plenty to find. Yeah. Again, I think the demo is still available to try, so go ahead and try that one. Haak's an interesting one. I am burnt out with Haak. I've got like 80 plus hours of Haak played, and that's not because it's a long game. It's reasonably substantial. You know, there's 15 different areas in Haak. But I've played it. I've tested it and worked through the early access period. So I've done so many different versions of some of these maps. You know, dating back to pre the 0.7 version of it, where some of the things look very different. I was at one point putting all the different barriers on and so on and so forth. And I ended up going with a much more kind of simplistic design. It's a great game. I think if you didn't have the experience that I've had with it in terms of every time it was updated, I played through the entire thing again. I burnt myself out with Haak. But the movement is great. The combat is great. The different areas they're very grounded, shall we say. It's quite a kind of, I don't want to say realistic, but it's grounded in reality to a certain extent, and therefore the different areas aren't maybe as wildly varied as, say, something like Biogun. But it's got a real kind of conscious art style to it. The traversal and exploration is great. The only reason it didn't get mentioned on my 2022, and to be honest, maybe I could have put it in my 2022 awards. It's just that for me, the game has been going on so long that I don't see it as a 2022 title. And that's wrong, actually, because it did come out officially this year. So I probably should have put it on my list, because it's a really good Metroidvania game. You know, it's a little bit finicky in places, but it's got a lot of really interesting mechanics. I'd argue that maybe the hacking ability comes too late in the game, and there were certain things that weren't very clear towards the end of it, but it's got some interesting characters, it's got interesting exploration, plenty of things to find. The translation, however, still needs a lot of work. It's made by a Chinese dev team, and it shows in places, unfortunately. I tried to help during early access with a lot of translation-y stuff. Yeah. But if you can look past that, Haak is a really good Metroidvania experience. For something that's a little bit more grounded in terms of aesthetic and reality, it's a really, there's lots of good exploration here. And the movement, once you get into the zone of the movement is really, really fun. And I think that is important. There's a lot of abilities that you can get which change up the combat, you know, charge attack, deflecting projectiles, different hook things. There's different collectibles to change your weapon stats, various quests to do. Some of the bosses are really interesting. You know, this is a big gauntlet boss, which is quite fun. There's a lot of good platforming challenges in this. Everything ties together really well in Haak, except the translation. And I hope the devs don't mind me saying that if they watch this video, because they have watched a lot of my videos with where Haak is involved. Good game, not super expensive. As far as I'm aware, for now the maps are complete, but they recently added in a whole new section and a whole new boss into the brewery. So What else they will be doing in terms of the game, I don't know. But it's been a long map to create this set of maps, because there's been lots and lots of changes over the course of the early access. And from this, one of the other games that I want to map out is Lone Fungus, but because of the many iterations and how many hours I put into this, the reason I haven't mapped out Lone Fungus is because of what happened with this and how burnt out I am with Haak. It was in early access for a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. So yeah, good game though, really good game, Haak. We're down to the last two Metroidvanias that I've played this year. Ghost Song was... Let's analyze it in terms of the three pillars, because that's been the whole point of this video. In terms of the three pillars, combat, exploration, and traversal abilities that also help out in combat, Ghost Song is mixed. The biomes are great. Visually, Ghost Song is stunning. It is beautiful artwork. There's beautiful music that actually I'm quite disappointed that I forgot about when I came to doing the music section of my arbitrary awards list. The exploration in Ghost Song is really good. The areas are really good. The way you can get around is really good. The combat is an acquired taste. I started off, having played the demo of Ghost Song, really enthusiastic about the combat. I love the way the interplay is the word that I'm after, of your weapon heating up, and once your weapon heats up it fires slower, but it enables your melee attack to do more damage until it cools down, and then your melee attack does less damage but your gun fires faster. That back and forth interplay is really, really good. The issue that I had with Ghost Song is that each time you collect one of these ship parts, the game difficulty ramps up and the enemies become harder. And on my first playthrough, I went off the beaten path. I went off the beaten path even, and I managed to make the game really hard quite quickly. And I then got stuck in a loop of constantly dying, constantly being unable to do enough damage to kill enemies. And yeah, I mean, what I probably should have done and what I probably needed to do was do some Souls style grinding to level up. And because enemies in this game don't actually give a lot of XP, can't actually remember what was it, biogel, nanogel, whatever it was that you acquire in this game to level up. I got stuck essentially as being quite underleveled and quite weak. I did make it through the game, but that, yeah, I recovered 3 ship parts in rapid succession, and the game's difficulty rapidly outscaled me. And because the amount of XP that you get from the enemies doesn't scale with the difficulty, I fell behind and I stayed behind, and the last 2/5 of the game became a bit of a slog. The other thing that I didn't figure out is that the story is quite integral to the experience. And the story is actually really good, but in order to get the full story, you need to make sure you do the Souls thing of exhausting the dialogue with each NPC every single time you come back with a ship part. And I didn't, and therefore I missed out on a chunk of the story, which I'm not going to say it ruined the experience for me, but it did act as a detriment to the story, to the overall experience. So, 3 pillars. Combat is good. Exploration is great. The abilities that you can get to do these things are also really solid. Just watch out for the ramping it up in difficulty. Make sure you talk to all of the NPCs every time you do them. In terms of making the map, that was great fun. The in-game map does, again, the same thing that a lot of games are doing in terms of Metroidvania, where each of these rooms is its own little graphic, and then the map screen splices them together. It's a bit unpolished, shall we say. This is what the map actually looks like. This is what the in-game map looks like. And you can see there are a load of places where the rooms don't quite line up properly. And you've got a lot of big rooms that I drew notes and stuff on. This is one of my work in progress bits and pieces. So you can see how I went through and I neatened up all of the borders and, you know, drew round everything. And then I just flipped back to this. You know, I shadowed everything and put loads of notes on. This was a great map to make. This was a great map to clean up. And I do not want the developers' efforts to be... I don't want it to sound like I'm shitting on Matt's efforts as the solo developer in this, because I think what he did, a game of this size, this ambitious, was excellent. You know, it's been 10 years or so, I believe, in the making. Technically, you know, what has been done here is really, really good. I just think that the map looks like it doesn't have the same level of polish as a lot of the rest of the game. So I just felt I wanted to clean it up. And it took me a long time, because, you know, all of this stuff is individually drawn on with pen tool and stuff. It was a long map to make. I feel like the end result is worth it, but again, I don't want it... I don't want to come across as, oh look, I've done a better job than the developer has done, which I've been accused of already in a couple of places on the internet. I don't want the original efforts of the developer to go unnoticed at all. But there is a difference. There is a difference. So Ghost Song was a weird one. It's a good game. It's not as amazing, I don't think, as people are saying. I think it has some issues. It's certainly not an 8.5 or a 9.5 out of 10 as far as I am concerned, but it is fun. There's good exploration, but just essentially don't do what I did. Don't hand in the ship parts too quickly, because you can very easily lock yourself into a difficulty spike that will ruin, essentially, your enjoyment of the game. This is a game, I think, that you play for the story. If you play it for the story, you make sure you talk to all the NPCs, you take it slow, you will have a good time with Ghost Song. But I didn't. I had a great time putting this map together, though. That I really, really enjoyed putting this map together. Let's take a look at the final map that I've done this year. Grime came out last year. Was it last year? I think it was last year. So it couldn't technically win an award for a 2022 Metroidvania, although I kind of put it in as a bonus. I'd already got the base maps for this because, I did them all for when the first version of the game came out. And a lot of them have changed ever so slightly. This is what the original unformed desert looked like. Can't open that in a new tab, unfortunately. You compare it to the new one. There's different pieces. There's different things in different locations. But the big thing about this version of the game is that there's an entire new area put in, and it's a massive new area. And it's got two major bosses, some tricksy platforming. Grime is a 2D, 2.5D Souls-like Metroidvania. It's got stamina-based combat. It's quite challenging. It's got proper Soul-style bosses. It's got proper Soul-style music from Alex Rowe. it is a really complete package in terms of all three pillars of Metroidvania excellence. It's got really good combat with loads of different builds. It's got leveling up, it's got stats, it's got proper kind of Souls style progression in that sense. In terms of exploration, all of these biomes are very, very different visually. They've all got their own distinct color palette. They've all got their own distinct feel. Some of the backgrounds are just weird. There's a real kind of sense of body horror in some of them that I think is really cool. The fact that it's a game made by only 5 people as well really adds to how impressive a lot of these. This place is full of teeth, for example. So the different areas to explore are great. The variety of combat is excellent, and the third pillar is the way you go between these things, the traversal. And Grime has a lot of really cool upgrades that enable you to get around things. The self-pull ability that you get from Shapely enables you to basically use the bash ability from Ori, kind of, to help with traversing around things. You can get a hover ability, a double jump, an air dash, a lot of staples of the genre, but with a couple of gravity-based things like the pull ability, the self-pull ability, all tied into the fact that you are essentially a living black hole, traversing the massive body of a kind of planet-sized person. It's got a proper Soul-style story in the sense that there are little tidbits of information, but realistically you have to try and figure things out for yourself. Grime Colors of Rot was a really great game to map out, frankly, just like the first version, the pre-DLC version of the game. And by all accounts, the New Game Plus version that will be coming out probably sometime in the new year, that's going to have some interesting changes as well, by the sound of it. So the whole point of this video essentially was it was supposed to be an award for the most fun Metroidvania mapping this year, but essentially the winner of this award was me. I got to win this. I enjoyed 2022 because of having all of these games to map out. I think Ghost Song was the game that I had to work the hardest at mapping. No, that I had to work the hardest at making a good looking map for. Souldiers made it quite easy because the in-game assets for Souldiers were so well done. Grime also was a really good and an easy game to make look good. A lot of the bits and pieces I kind of had to make from scratch because my old files were a little bit broken, but because I'd already figured out what I was doing, I could just copy things over and create newer versions of them. But yeah, the real winner of mapping things in 2022 was me. I got a great and that's not me saying, oh, look how good I am, by the way. That's me saying I won the game. I enjoyed 2022 because of how many cool games I got to map out, and how much I enjoyed going back and revisiting some classics. So in terms of the point of this video, which is now over an hour long because I talk too much, God knows whether anybody will have stuck around for this entire thing. I believe the winner is me. I won this year. My enjoyment, my sense of fun won this year because I got to make a lot of cool maps. If I was going to, now that we break down to it, what was the best map that I made this year, it's going to be a tie between Ghost Song and Grime Colours of Rot, if I'm honest, and maybe even with Souldiers. There's just been a lot of good games to map out this year, you know, games that I've enjoyed. Ghost Song, I think, wins the award for my most viewed map of the year. A lot of people have watched the kind of video and used my map for that, just because of the nature of the game. But Grime, you know, Grime Colours of Rot has only been out a week, maybe, by this point, just over. So that's kind of ramping up as well, but it doesn't have the reach that Ghost Song did. You know, Ghost Song's been 10 years in the making, widely advertised. So yeah, 2022 for maps was good. I ate well, as they say. 2023 has got, hopefully, Silk Song. I think we know that it's supposed to be out in 2023, don't we? Has that been confirmed? Don't know. Can't remember. Silk Song in 2023. Biogun, I assume, in 2023. The something case of Benedict Fox is very high up on my list of games that I am anticipating for next year. I don't know what else there is in terms of Metroidvanias coming out. Look forward, friends, to more maps in the coming year. We shall be adding many more folders to this. As always, you can go to demajen.co.uk. I've recently made sure it's got a proper security certificate so it doesn't look like I'm trying to hack you. This is my website. I have created and coded this. It is basic as all hell and probably needs some accessibility features. If there are things that it needs to, please let me know. That doesn't work. That needs fixing. You can go to here and, you know, click on any of these things to sort out my maps. I recently put together an actual page for Grime, which you can go to. You may see some ads on these pages just because, you know, I have to pay for server bandwidth and stuff. But they shouldn't be intrusive. They shouldn't get in any way. They're not even working yet, but we'll see how that goes. Look forward to more maps in 2023. I've made a lot of maps, folks. I've made a lot of maps. I like making maps. Let's hope I get to make some more cool ones next year. Thank you very much for sticking with this. If you have slogged through an hour and 20 odd minutes of me talking, it's not the most dynamic video to watch, I know, but hopefully my insight, such as it is, into these games is interesting to people. Have yourselves a great Christmas, great New Year. Enjoy the rest of 2022. I'll see you all back here in 2023 for more Metroidvania maps. Until then, stay safe, look after yourselves. Cheerio. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, why not click the like button and consider subscribing. Remember, you can ring the bell notification icon to get notified when new videos go live. And until next time, cheerio.